Good evening and welcome to yet another episode of COVID-19 beating. No, beating COVID-19. Um, been a long day. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch the episodes that have gone past and participating also in understanding what's going on. Today we're going to cover another country, another lockdown. We've been able to cover the extreme and total lockdown countries. We took an example of New Zealand and a little excursion into China. On the no lockdown countries, we covered Taiwan. And today we're going to cover the partial and easy lockdown countries. And we have already got an example of which I will start giving a description of right now. This country has a population of 5.6 million. As an area, the size of the country is 721.5 square kilometers. It has a GDP of 64,578 and 77 US dollars. Its COVID-19 cases were 39,850 and the deaths were 25. This country is Singapore. At this particular time, Singapore is already reopening its economy, and we shall cover the technique they use, which is known as the circuit breaker. Singapore instituted a circuit breaker approach in the early days of April. They set up the initial measures by the 3rd of April, and by the 21st of April, they engaged or tightened the circuit breakers. By the 2nd of May, they relaxed the circuit breakers. The circuit breaker is a policy of tightening controls or loosening controls as per the monitoring they are seeing during the pandemic. Again, the information in detail will be added on in the description in this bulletin. After engaging and disengaging the circuit breakers, they were able to control the pandemic to such a degree that the death rate was so low that they feel that they can actively open their businesses. They had already said by early May that they will extend their circuit breaker measures until the 2nd of June, and true to form, 2nd of June, they engaged the post-circuit breakers, which are number one, safe reopening, which happened on the 2nd of June. Number two, there's the safe transition and the safe nation. Those are the three post-circuit breaker transition steps that they are taking. The most important thing, methods or whatever the steps they took to contain the COVID-19 was as follows. The closure of all non-essential workplaces, closure of all schools, preschools, and student care centers except essential care. They closed restriction on movements and gatherings. Food establishments were only allowed to do takeaway service, drive-through, or delivery services. Masks were made compulsory, and closure of non-essential and some food shops. Now, basically, Singapore has instituted a partial or easy lockdown, similar to Kenya. But because of the inherent ability, Singapore does have a better and bigger GDP than Kenya by far. But on the one hand, they had measures which were well thought out. And because of the application of those measures, the country has been able to go through the COVID pandemic and is now on the path to reopening. Singapore is an example and a success story in terms of how to handle a partial lockdown. Their steps were decisive and their actions were decisive as well. They did not show favoritism during the implementation. And Singapore is always and continues to be an example of a wonderful country, not only to visit, but to emulate and to learn from. I personally have never been there, but I pray one day I do step into Singapore. To wrap up this week, because tomorrow we're going to do a kind of summary before Sunday's message. To wrap up this week, we've seen in this week that there is no perfect lockdown. there are success stories in every version of lockdown, and those successful cases are usually built on three basic principles. Number one, the use of common sense steps. You can see when it came to the Taiwan example, the wearing of masks, the threat levels, the alert levels, were all common sense measures. When you look at the lockdown, the extreme and total lockdown, the example of New Zealand, they had the four levels. Four. What was the word again? Let me get the correct word. For New Zealand, they had the 4 alert system. Yes, and Singapore had the circuit breakers. Just to show you that for us to succeed, we have to have concise, common sense regulations that will enable everybody to understand what their part is. And also, because of the number one is the common sense measures. Number 2, compliance and support by the society, whereby the people rallied behind the government to make the government succeed. And number 3, they tried as much as possible not to switch off the economy. So the economy was well taken care of. The people were supported the government, and the government made common sense approaches to solving the problem. At the end of the day, as I said, there is no one-size-fits-all lockdown policy. But in every style of lockdown, there is a success story. Therefore, it doesn't mean that the Chinese version should work in Kenya, or the Kenyan version should work in South Africa, or the South African version should work in Australia. In every case, the lockdown measures can have a success if applied well. Well, I want to thank you very much for spending the time with me this week. We have been going through lockdowns and understanding them. And thank you for listening in, sending your regards and comments. And I wish you guys a good night. God bless, and see you in the next one.